Welcome, I'm John Caldera, president of the Independence Institute and your devil's advocate. Later in the program, we're going to be talking about not pot, but reporting on pot, so stay tuned for that. But first, a look at, well, 25 years of fighting for property rights. A friend of mine, Perry Pendley from the Mountain States Legal Foundation. Glad to have you. Talk to me a little bit about Mountain States Legal. It's been around for a long time.
Long time, 1977.
It's actually one of the original, how to put it, public sector law firms. Is that the right way to put it?
Yeah, exactly right. Nonprofit, public interest legal foundations that represent people for free to do one thing, sue to try to win for them. Take their cases all the way to Supreme Court if we can.
So you're like a little ACLU, just a little different flavor.
Yeah, pretty far to the right, opposite ACLU.
Although you got to find yourself agreeing with them on occasion.
Yeah, on a lot of things we do, and there's been a number of cases where the ACLU should have stepped in and turned to us and said, we'd like you to do it if you don't mind, and we have.
Really? That's great.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. So, but you guys specialize, it seems like you've specialized historically on property rights issues, which has been incredibly important to Western states.
Hugely so. Property rights, I guess I combine it with property rights and federal land issues because a third of the country is owned by the United States government, most of it here in the Rocky Mountain West. And so a lot of these rural counties, 60, 70, 80, 90% of the counties owned by the federal government. If you're going to have any kind of an economy at all, it's going to be on federal lands.
How much of Colorado is federal land?
About 50%.
So half of Colorado is federal property.
That's right.
And that's forests and parks and BLM lands and all sorts of other lands.
Fish and Wildlife Service, the whole thing, exactly. A lot of that land, or some of that land's off limits. It's wilderness areas, for example, or national park lands, but a lot of it also is U.S. Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, and that's so-called multiple use land. It's supposed to be used for ranching or mining or oil and gas or energy activities.
Give me an example of when a property owner has to fight for his rights and needs somebody like you.
Exactly.
Because a lot of times in the Western states, you know, if you're Exxon, you've got a legal team. You can sue if your property rights are being taken out. But if you're a small farmer, if you're just a regular Joe, you can't sue without the help of somebody like Mountain States.
That's exactly right. We had a case just a few weeks ago, settled it, a man by the name of Andy Johnson from Fort Bridger, Wyoming. He got a permit from the Wyoming State Engineer to put a stock pond on his property for his kids to play in and fish and, you know, all those kind of good things that come with a water body. And then all of a sudden the Corps of Engineers and the EPA was on him and said, hey, you're going to get a $75,000 a day fine unless you turn this back to the way it used to be. I read about it. I saw it on Fox News. I put in a call to him and I said, hey, I'm a Wyoming guy. We're not going to let that happen to you. We're going to fight for you. And we did. Represented him and backed the EPA off.
$75,000
Oh, exactly right. Totally.
For something he had permission to build. Do I understand that right?
That's absolutely right.
So government said, yes, you can. So yes, I did. And then they said 75 grand until you get it back the way it was.
Exactly right. And play by our rules. And the sad thing, you know, John, is the fact that we saved Andy Johnson. We saved his family. We saved his farm. But there's thousands and thousands of people out there don't know about Mountain States Legal Foundation, aren't going to get that call that we're here to help, and they need to know that.
What's been the biggest case out of the many years at Mountain States?
Oh, the biggest case of all was the case I took to the Supreme Court 3 times in a row. And we represented a husband and wife outfit down in Colorado Springs, Adirondack Constructors, Inc. We sued Pena, who was the Secretary of Transportation at the time, and the issue was, could the federal government award highway construction contracts based on the race of the owner of the business? And our client is an Anglo guy. He did great work, low bids, all that sort of thing, and they passed him over saying, well...
Even though you're a low bid and you're best qualified,
exactly.
I'm sorry, the taxpayers need to pay for somebody else.
Yeah, we need
in a preferred class.
That's exactly right. We're going to have a racial preference. Took it to the Supreme Court, won a huge victory in 1995. Supreme Court Justice O'Connor said, anytime any governmental entity, federal, state, or local, discriminates on the basis of race, the person who's discriminated against can sue under the Equal Protection Clause, and that's still good law today.
Is that the same Sandra Day O'Connor
exactly.
who then later voted that affirmative action in universities is okay
for 25 more years?
For 25, she's the same one who also said in the Kelo case you can pull private land and give it to another private guy.
She was on the right side on the Kelo case.
Okay.
It was Justice Kennedy who flip-flopped, but he flip-flopped because Justice O'Connor had earlier flip-flopped, and that's the kind of nonsense we deal with.
Right.
But that was the big case. 3 times the Supreme Court of the United States. Precedent we set is still good law today. It was cited by the Supreme Court in the Fisher case.
You do more than just sue. Part of it is to communicate. This book is your latest one, Summary Judgment. Now, this is your second big book. The other one was
Sagebrush Rebel
was a lot
Reagan.
of fun. This is basically a collection of your columns over the years.
Yes.
But why?
Well, simply because I read through them, and my thought was, in going back to 1990 when I started this and got it published all across the country, was, oh, these are going to be old news. But John, you know, the sad thing was, I read these things and they're as current as yesterday's news. That it's the stuff that was happening in 1990 is still happening today. And it's lessons worth learning.
Like what?
About environmental groups trying to shut down everything, trying to shut down coal, oil and gas, any economic
Are you just playing
activity.
sour grapes because you're losing? Is that the problem?
Because we're losing.
That they're finding wonderful ways to stop property rights from being used for energy
and
production.
putting people out of work with this chasing this crazy idea that we're all going to do renewable energy and will keep us warm in the winter.
Oh, I think you and I would agree. That's terrific. I want that to happen.
Exactly.
I just don't want the government to use cronyism and corporate welfare to force it on us.
Well,
at a huge
and
cost.
what we're seeing at this is we're spending zillions of dollars on so-called green energy because it doesn't pay for itself, and we're driving coal companies, for example, into bankruptcy. It's positively shameful, the loss of wealth in this country because of their anti-coal attitude.
Talk to me a little bit, and I think you might touch on this in the book as well, which there's this feeling that if you believe in property rights,
Yes.
you don't like the environment. That if you believe that people can own their property and should be able to do a lot of what they wish to do on their own property, then you don't like the environment. You want to rape the environment and pillage it and destroy it for future generations. How is it that a free market viewpoint can be pro-environmental?
Exactly, because it's about the property owner. The great tragedy is when nobody owns the land. You see land trashed in a city or in a state or anywhere in the country. It's trashed because nobody owns it, nobody's taking care of it.
What do you mean nobody owns it, nobody takes care of it?
Well, I'm assuming, say a piece of public land. The landowner who owns property, he takes care of his property, he wants to use it, he wants to pass it on. He's not going to trash his own property. It's the government that allows its land to be trashed.
Of course he is. He's going to put a mine there. He's going to strip mine it. He's going to destroy it. He's going to take away the vegetation. The irrigation's going to come flowing down. It's going to rip it. That's what an owner is going to do to his property.
Oh, absolutely not.
Why?
Would you do that to your property?
Depends on the price. If somebody came along and said, you want to strip mine my backyard? Well, if it's enough, why wouldn't I?
Well, that's we have rules and regulations with regard to how that's done, and they've been in place since the 70s. But the position of the environmental groups is not, let's do it right, let's keep it clean, let's grow jobs and create revenues, but at the same time take care of the land for future generations. That's not their objective. Their objective is to stop everything.
I guess when you say when people own something,
Yes.
they treat it differently.
Well, they do.
You know, and you know that when you rent a car, have you ever noticed when you rent a car, you never get it washed? You know, when there's a pothole up ahead, you're thinking, I wonder what the suspension on this baby can do, because it's not yours. When you got your first car, you washed it, you gave it oil changes, you took care of it. When you got your first house, you watered the lawn, you took care of it, and because you knew as its value went up, your net worth went up. You had a vested interest.
Absolutely. Well, I've been on, a lot of my essays are about being with ranchers and cowboys throughout the West. And I've been on their land, I've been with them and seen the things that they do, that their fathers and their grandfathers did before them, and that they hope their sons and grandsons will do after them.
Why do you think there's such a anti-rural feeling in politics today. I mean, we've got a governor
Yes.
who declared war on rural Colorado. We've got an urbanist society that, you know, we're packing them and stacking them in houses, and people outside who work the land
Yes.
have really become second-class citizens.
Well,
Why is that?
They absolutely have. Well, I just think they're collateral damage as far as the politicians are concerned. There's more people in the urban areas, and they want to please the people in the urban areas, and they do it by beating up on the rural folks. They just see it as collateral damage, and well, that's the way it breaks.
Give me one of the greater stories you have from here.
Well, my favorite story is I took my son Luke when he was a pretty young kid. I went to see the movie White Fang, Walt Disney movie, Jack London.
And that was the Jack London novel,
exactly right. Yeah,
okay.
White Fang, great flick, very entertaining. And we're sitting rolling the credits. I always like to see where they filmed these things, where they say we filmed it in Kansas, but they were in Canada. I hate that. And we're watching the credits roll, and it said, there's no, this is a work of fiction. There's no record of a wolf or a healthy pack of wolves attacking a human being in North America. Well, I knew that was untrue. That couldn't be possibly true. I did some research.
Why couldn't it be possibly true?
Think about a wolf. A wolf, that's the nature of a wolf. It's a predator, and it would come after somebody, two-legged or four-legged. And so
it comes after enough livestock.
It comes after livestock. It comes after people. It comes after small kids. And I discovered that it was all nonsense. So I wrote to Michael Eisner with Walt Disney, and I complained. He bucked it over to Defenders of Wildlife, who had actually written it, and it was filled with all these lawyer caveats, like assuming all wolves in the wild are really rabid, or they had been formerly domesticated and released, and therefore they're crazy.
Did Eisner actually read your letter?
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he did, and sent it over to Defenders, and Defenders wrote back to me. And of course, every time there's a story about a wolf attacking somebody, and the Defenders again say, wolves never do this. This is totally, it's never happened before. Then I'll bring out my old letters. But my pleasure is that Walt Disney learned its lesson, because after the movie Frozen came out, the climate change people went to Disney and said, we want to use your Frozen characters to talk about climate change. Disney said, no. No, we're not going to be doing that.
It's funny for me how culture is impacted with this.
Oh, sure.
So, you know, you do the movie White Fang, and you have to put that in to please a certain crowd, and then people believe that.
Yes.
You know, to the point where we want Disney characters to take care of political themes.
Yeah.
And people fall for that stuff.
They really do.
All right, people want to grab a copy of this. Where do they go?
Go to our website, www.mountainstateslegal.org, and it's there.
mountainstateslegal.org.
.org.
Or they could also just drop you a few bucks if they like what you do.
They could do that.
Go figure that.
Amazing
Perry, thank
thing.
you. Stay tuned.
John, good to be with you.